Go ahead and get us started here. We asked you to fill out some poll questions on the outside, so I'm going to go ahead and read the answers out for that so that our presenters do know. Dana, it does sound like there are some audio issues going on. You guys hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, Jamie.
Yeah, and I can too.
Okay, perfect. So I would ask for some of the people who are having audio issues, if you wouldn't mind calling in on the phone. The phone number is 866-749-7984. If you need that number again, it's 866-749-7984. And then if you're still having issues, if you would please private chat the WTI staff members and they can go ahead and help you as well. So as far as the poll questions along the outside, it does look like most of you are joining us by yourself today, but there are a few of you joining in groups. And if you are one of those in the groups, if you would please send us an email to info@ruralsafetycenter.org with the names and emails of the people in your group if you have not all registered already. And that will allow you to receive our survey following today's webinar. And the survey is how you go ahead and request certificates of completion for today's webinar. It also looks like where you guys are all joining us from is a pretty good mix of people today. We have about 7% of you from Federal Transportation Department, about 31% from state DOTs, about 17% from local transportation departments, 8% from state highway safety offices, about 2% from tribal governments, about 1% from local technical assistance programs, 10% from other federal, state, or local agencies that I haven't listed already, 1% from first responders, and about 6% from universities, and about 5% from private consultants and 12% from other. So thank you for that. That's a great broad base today that will be able to hear this presentation. From where you're joining us from today, it looks like we have about 17% from the Northeast, about 23% from the Southeast, 20% from the Midwest, 34% from the West, and 3% from other. And most of you are joining us by the computer only. And again, I will mention that if you do have any issues with the audio, if you would please call in at 866-749-7984. And Dana, if you could put that phone number in the chat pod as well, because there are some people that still are unable to hear. I would appreciate that. So I'm going to move us over to our presentation. A few logistics for today's webinar. Today's webinar will be an hour and a half long. It is being recorded and will be archived on our website. For quality of that recording, we have muted everyone for this presentation. On the left-hand side, you'll see a chat pod, and that is where you can put any questions that you may have for our speakers. You may do so at any time, and when we do stop for question and answer, I will read those out to our presenters for you. If you are listening by phone, we would ask you to please mute your computer speakers, otherwise you may hear some feedback. There's also a way to maximize the presentation for any videos or graphics that we may show you. In the top right-hand corner, you'll see 4 arrows that press outward. That is what you would want to press to get rid of the extraneous information on the left and bottom side of the presentation, and it will make just the PowerPoint itself full screen. At the end of each section today, there will be time for question and answers. I'd also like to point out that in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll find a handout pod. There is a resource handout as well as the PDF of today's presentation in case you'd like to download that as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have follow-up surveys that come out following today's webinar. There will be one that comes out directly following it. I'm going to show the link right now on the screen as well in case it does go to your junk email box. That survey link is how you go ahead and request certificates of completion for today's webinar. The survey that will come out in about 3 months will ask you what you did with the information from today's webinar. Perhaps you shared the archived version with a colleague. Perhaps you went and looked up more information about human trafficking. So we're looking into what you've done with the information from today's webinar. On the screen now, you will see what a certificate of completion in the CEU form looks like. When you receive this, you will fill it out and send it back. Our CEUs are free, but they are done through a different department at Montana State University, so this will be needed to be sent back to them, and the instructions will come in the email for you once you sign up for it. You can also request a verification of completion form, which is the one on the right-hand side. That one will show you any of the CEUs that you have asked for any of our webinars, as well as our 2 summits that we've had in the past. We are very lucky to have 2 presenters today. I'm very excited for today's webinar and to hear about the transportation side of human trafficking. Today we have Ms. Kristen Joyner and Chief David Lorenzen. Both of them were invited to serve on the Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chow's Advisory Council on Human Trafficking in 2019. The purpose of the Advisory Council was to research and produce a report for the United States Congress that would be a working resource for all sectors and all modes of the transportation industry, providing guidance that will enable people to take practical steps to end modern-day slavery. Both have worked the majority of their careers informing, educating, and fighting for women, men, girls, and boys who have been used by traffickers in local communities across the United States and exploited through our transportation system. We're very excited to have both of them today to talk about this with us. The goal of today's webinar is that once you've completed the webinar, you will have research-based data, survivor-informed messaging, practical ways that you can identify potential incidents of human trafficking, what to safely do and with what you observe, and how you can encourage others to join you in the fight to end modern-day slavery. To achieve this webinar goal, you will learn to understand what human trafficking is and how it is affecting the transportation sector, to utilize existing resources for safely reporting cases of suspected human trafficking, and to influence your coworkers, business associates, community, family, and friends to join in the fight to end modern-day slavery. And now I am going to ask you one poll question before I do turn this over to Kristen. So have you previously heard of transportation's tie to human trafficking? Yes, I've seen it firsthand. Yes, I've previously attended a presentation. Yes, my workplace has a training. Yes, no, or I don't know, or I don't remember. And we'll give everyone just a few seconds here to fill out this poll. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to broadcast these results now so everyone can see them. So it looks like we have about 33% of people who have not yet heard of transportation's tie to human trafficking, about 43% who said yes, as well as the others who said 4% yes, my workplace has a training, 12% yes, I've previously attended a presentation, and about 3.5% yes, I have seen it firsthand. So Kristen and David, I hope that will help you as you move along through the presentation to know where our audience stands with this information so far. And at this point in time, Kristen, you should be able to move the slides yourself using the arrow keys underneath the slides.
All right. Thank you so much for, can you hear me okay? Let me test that.
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to explore this really important topic of human trafficking. David and I have prepared information for you that we believe is important for anyone working in the transportation sector, no matter what part of that transportation sector that you're involved in, if it's roads, bridges, if it's public transportation, rail, ports. It's, I know this is rural road safety, but just know that when we talk about transportation, and you'll see in a minute the data on this, you will see that we are looking broadly because this is a very broad impact that we are seeing in the United States. So the first thing that I have every audience do is repeat my mantra about human trafficking. And if we were all sitting in a place together, whether it was a classroom or an auditorium or a football field somewhere, I would ask you to stand up. And so just humor me with this, if you don't mind. Go ahead and stand up, and I want you to repeat after me. Not on my bus. Not on my train. Not on my roads. Not in my community. Okay, now don't sit down yet, because I know that you need to really take hold of this mantra. And so I want us to say it again, and then we'll jump into the why this matters, and know that at the end we'll repeat it again. So this time I want to hear it, even over the silence of a webinar. I want to hear you repeat this mantra. Not on my bus, not on my train, not on my roads, not in my community. Excellent. Everybody sit down, and if you weren't already standing up, that's okay. Don't get too comfortable, because David and I will be encouraging you in a lot of different ways today to get involved in this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is a photo of the group that we worked with on human trafficking awareness from Secretary Elaine Chao's office. This was a project that defined strategies for identifying and reporting instances of human trafficking. We made recommendations for administrative or legislative changes to use programs, property, or other resources owned, operated, or funded by DOT to combat human trafficking. And we also provided best practices for state and local transportation stakeholders based on multidisciplinary research and promising evidence-based models and programs. We, in this report to Congress, provided sample training materials, strategies to identify victims. It's a very easy-to-use report. And David and I are both quite proud to have been asked. I've been working on this issue of human trafficking awareness within the transit sector. My focus has been pretty narrow until the last couple of years. So it was, how are people trafficked in and around our buses, rail stations, in rural communities? How is this happening within the transit industry? And if it is happening, then, and it is, but the question was originally, if it is happening, then what is our responsibility? What is our role, and what is our responsibility? So that has now taken us to this broader context of transportation. It's important to start every discussion about human trafficking with, what does the law have to say? So what you see here is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. And again, I told you not to get comfortable, because I want you to participate in this with me. Even if you're sitting at your dining room table, or maybe you're having to sit outside because there's too much going on inside your house right now. We are in strange times. But I want you to read with me the yellow words when I get to it. This is the only the only slide that I actually read everything word for word. And again, when we get to the yellow, I want you to repeat that with me. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 says this: the term severe forms of trafficking in persons means sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by, everybody read it with me, force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has, read it with me, not attained 18 years of age. Now, let's break that down just a little bit, okay? So it's a commercial sex act that's been induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Means that if the person is over the age of 18, you must prove that there was force, fraud, or coercion as it related to this commercial sex act. The other side of this is that if the person is under the age of 18, you do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. Because under the age of 18, well, let's face it, the science, the brain science that's out there tells us that the human brain does not really fully develop until about the age of 24. That is when our reasoning is in full gear, about age 24. So if you think about a 14-year-old who is told, let's say they're a runaway, they end up at a bus station and they look a little sad maybe, and they only have a backpack with them. And some guy comes up to this 14-year-old and says, "Hey, you shouldn't be crying. You're too beautiful to cry." And the girl perks up and he says, "You know what? You are so beautiful. I want to feature you in my next music video." Well, the guy doesn't have a music video, at least not one that we want our children to be a part of. That's fraud. You could also bring coercion in there if she's forced. If there's also coercion there, there could also be force. If there's drug use or a gun or threat to bodily harm. So if you're under the age of 18, you do not have to prove any of that, force, fraud, or coercion. The second piece of this law, this Victims Protection Act, is severe forms of trafficking in persons when you have the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of, again, force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. Well, that's a lot of words. It's a lot of words that talks about sex trafficking, a lot of words that talk about labor trafficking. But what does that really look like in our society? So labor trafficking could be construction workers. It could be hotel housekeeping, hospitality. It could be working in a factory. It could be working in a kitchen. Then you have other forms of this modern-day slavery, and it could be any kind of sexual act that you can imagine. A friend of mine works with 12 to 18-year-olds, particularly girls who have been trafficked, and she said when she sits across from them in a police station and they're having to recall what the actual sex act was, it's not really maybe what you and I have ever even imagined. What is the one thing that we brand in our farming communities? you're welcome to chat that answer in. What do we brand? If you want to, so I don't see any chats coming up, but any answers to that question coming up. But I will say the only thing that we brand is cattle and livestock, unless you are involved in human trafficking. And one of the things that that we have found in our research is that traffickers like to brand with tattoos their property, because they do not believe that these girls, boys, men, or women are actually human. They are viewed as just property. And one of the first things that a survivor of human trafficking wants to do when they get out is get rid of that constant reminder of ownership. So let's look at some of the data. There was a research project done by Polaris that interviewed a small set of self-reporting survivors of human trafficking. And in this research project, they found that human traffickers exploit legitimate systems within multiple business sectors for their own profits. From traffickers who use banks to stores, buses to move their victims around, to hotel rooms that are an integral part of the operations of sex trafficking, and the social media that are vital recruitment tools. This report highlights the way industries can make fundamental shifts to their systems to prevent, detect, and disrupt human trafficking. We're going to look at some of these specific things, and I did put a link to this report into the handout that you've got. The first thing that I'd like for you to see, and I realize that there's a lot of information here, but on the left-hand side of this particular graph, you see different ways that people are trafficked. So it might be escort services, it might be outdoor solicitation, pornography, it might be peddling and begging, construction, hospitality, landscaping, art, sports, entertainment, and the list goes on. The list on the left side of the screen will intersect with a legitimate U.S. business. So the first column is financial services industry. The next is hotels and motels. If you move all the way over to where the airplane is, you will see all of the different ways that the transportation sector intersects with the different forms of human trafficking, different ways that people were trafficked who were a part of this particular survey. The survey also looked at what was the racial makeup and ethnicity of those being interviewed. They found that 67% were white Caucasian, 14% were Latina, 10% Black African American, 7% multiracial, multi-ethnic, 7% American Indian, Alaskan Native, 7% Asian, and all other made up the 5%. And then you have some that did not disclose. Why is this important? Because when we look around on our roads, when we look around at a rest stop, when we look around at maybe a DMV, people who are trafficked are hiding in plain sight, and they might not always look like what you think they should look like. I do want to point out one thing about the American Indian Alaska Native part of this survey. Remember, this was a small group who were interviewed as survivors. And this is the makeup of that particular group. We do know that with Native Americans, and a lot of you I saw are from areas of the country where you intersect with tribes. What we do know is that where there are oil fields in particular, that there is an overrepresentation of Native American women who are trafficked. As a matter of fact, there's a study that just came out that it's 7 times higher than white women per capita, that Native American and Alaskan women are trafficked. Next week, TRB is going to feature a webinar on missing and murdered Indigenous women and the relationship with sex trafficking. Margot Hill and I are going to be doing that presentation. That's July 29th. It's on Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific. And I'll put that information in the chat box so that you have it. But it is July 29th at 2 o'clock Eastern. So sometimes when we think about this issue of human trafficking, we think of the movie Taken. And if I were to see you right now in a classroom, I would ask you that question: how many of you have seen that movie Taken? And there would be many of you that would say yes, and that's how I know about human trafficking. I will tell you that that gives a glorified Hollywood view of one sliver of human trafficking. What we know from this research of the group that the survivors that were interviewed, there were 86% female, 12% male, and 2% gender minorities. We also found that the age that this particular set entered trafficking, more than half of them, it was under the age of 18. And some as young as somewhere between infancy to 11 years old. You have immigration status. I know that a lot of people think that this is an issue that happens over there, somewhere else, to other people. But I can tell you that 77% were U.S. citizen legal permanent residents. Only 23% of this group surveyed were foreign nationals. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So a little bit more information about what is human trafficking and what it's not. There is definitely a difference between smuggling and trafficking. There is a legal difference. Smuggling is a crime against a border, and trafficking is a crime against a person. So let me put this into maybe a little better place for you to understand. So a couple of years ago, when I was living in Texas, there was an 18-wheeler that was discovered on a Walmart parking lot in San Antonio. And when they opened up this tractor trailer, they found people inside. The reporter who was on the scene reported too quickly that this was human trafficking and had to go back and change that to smuggling. So what's the difference? Let's say a coyote makes someone pay $3,000 to get them across the U.S. border in this 18-wheeler. So in this tractor trailer. So all these people are paying this money. The tractor trailer is driven across the border with people in there. That is smuggling. You can smuggle people, you can smuggle drugs, you can smuggle guns, you can smuggle a lot of things. So it's bringing something illegally across the border. However, if that tractor trailer had been opened up and people had been taken out of there and put out at a migrant farm, or they had been taken to a warehouse to do factory work, or they had been put out on the street with a quota to provide so much money each day through selling themselves, then that is what trafficking, that's the difference in smuggling and trafficking. And by the way, if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat box. We definitely want to hear them, and we want to not only answer your questions, but also hear feedback from you as we go along. Probably you have heard at this point that human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry, but I don't know if we can really totally wrap our brains around that. So I want to do a little exercise with you. This is the only time during the presentation that I say, take out your phone and find your calculator app on there. Or if you're sitting at your office, pull out a calculator. And I want to walk through the numbers with you so that you understand what's really happening. In Oakland, California, there was a sting operation that was performed, and during the roundup of all of these teams, each of the teams were asked questions about their daily quota and tell us about your trafficker. Now, most people are not going to, in that situation, give up a lot of information because of how tied emotionally they are to their trafficker. But in this particular sting operation, a lot of good information was gathered. So in your calculator or on your phone app, I want you to put in 500 because that represents the daily quota that the average team in Oakland, California had to meet each day or each night that they were forced to work. So $500, and that person could come up with that money any way they wanted to, through sex, robbing, whatever it is, it was $500. Now, I want you to think about that, there's 365 days in a year. So let's say that the human traffickers in Oakland, that they were magnanimous and gave vacation so that they only were forced to work 300 days a year. So now I want you to multiply that $500 times 300 days. You very quickly get to $150,000 that one person is bringing in for one trafficker in Oakland. However, I want you to multiply that $150,000 times 4. That number represents the amount of money. It's almost half a million dollars tax-free that one trafficker in Oakland, California potentially makes in a year. This is a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry. I cannot emphasize that enough. And then layer in the fact that the United States is the highest producer of child pornography in the world. You cannot get away from the numbers. So we're all in the service industry, whether it is serving through the state where we are working with different divisions, working with transit agencies, working with law enforcement. We are in the service industry, and I want you to watch this video, and it's put out by the Michigan State Police. This particular video, watch it. You will actually see it twice, and then we're going to do a poll and talk about what we've seen. Technology can be really challenging at times.
It can. So while Dana is pulling that up, I'm going to actually ask you one of our first questions, and she'll just pause the video until we're ready for it. So the first
Wonderful.
question that came in for you, Kristen, is could some of the people we see as asking for handouts and appear to be homeless or say they're homeless, could they be trafficked?
That is certainly something that you need to consider, and later on on in this presentation, I actually have a screenshot from a video that was taken at a rail station, and it was of a group of people who were panhandling and how they were utilizing children in a ring like that. So I hope that answers your question, and it is yes. Let's take a look at this video. And remember, you may not be going into people's houses, but you do intersect with people and you see things. You see things.
Okay, and so before the video gets started, I'll just remind our speakers if you could mute your phones, please.
When you're working in all sorts of areas.
Okay, Jamie, I'm going to try this one more time and make sure that everybody is muted.
You see a lot of homes in all sorts of areas. You meet a lot of people and even pets. Out here, you have to take your job seriously and always be on the lookout to find better ways to safeguard the people you serve.
Okay, so we can go ahead and move on from this, if that's okay with you. Maybe there's a way to pull it up later on. You can test it or something. This video, I have provided a link to it. It is an impactful video because the first time that you go through it, you see people interacting and seeing things that they normally that might seem very normal. The one that you were just looking at was a man who was outside of a shop and he was sweeping. You have another man who has driven up in a utility vehicle, and he says to the man sweeping, "Hey, what kind of shop do you have here?" And the man sweeping says, "A tool and die shop." And the utility worker says, "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood." But what you might miss back behind is a man in a window pulling a boy out from being seen and taking him back inside. Well, the first thing is a tool and die shop. What is it doing in a mixed-use neighborhood where you've got families and homes there? Typically, your tool and die shops are in industrial areas. Another thing is that why would you have a tool and die shop in a location where there are windows that might be used for a furniture store or a clothing store? It doesn't make sense. And I would imagine that when that utility worker walked away, they had that gut feeling of something didn't quite seem right. A couple of other things that you'll see in the video. The first time through, you really don't see it. You're kind of aware, but you don't really see it. Then when you go back through it again, you will see bars on the inside of a second-story window as opposed to bars on the outside of a first-story window. You will see a girl being pulled back in who is actually trying to make contact with a utility worker below the window, and she's pulled back in. You might also see in the background a child being pulled into a panel van. And all of these things, our brains work so well that we see it. We take a little quick snippet of video in our brains, but in our gut says, oh, something's not right. But then our brain in our head says, oh, you didn't really see anything. That's not real. You certainly don't need to do anything. You don't need to get involved. I will tell you that the new science about brains is that there are actually brain cells in our stomach. And so it causes me to think, well, maybe we need to listen to that gut brain a lot more. That's that brain that sees things and desires to do the right thing, whereas our logical brain would talk us out of it. So when you see something and you have a gut reaction to it, we want you to say something. And I'm going to give you a phone number for how you can say something. I want you to write this down. And I'm going to say this several times through the presentation. I will show it on the screen in a minute, but I want you to actually write this down in a particular way. The number is 888-3737-888. Now, if you look at that, it looks kind of funny. It doesn't look like a phone number because you have 888-3737-888. But that is an easy way for you to remember the National Human Trafficking Hotline that goes to Polaris. Again, it's 888-3737-888. If you call that number anytime, day or night, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that phone is answered by a real person. And the good thing about that is that that real person can actually ask you some clarifying questions and can immediately notify law enforcement or figure out if this is part of a pattern happening in a particular area. Now, that's only if you see something and you have a concern about it. If you actually see a crime in progress, dial 911 and report that. Even if you're not certain, go with your gut. That's what I always say. Go with your gut. So is this really happening? I hope that at this point you know. Yes, from everything we've seen on TV, all of the recent news reports, the data that I've already shown you, things that you've come in contact with, conversations that you've had with people. I would hope at this point that you've heard something. But if you look at this heat map, these are the calls, the confirmed calls that have come into the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And these and by the way, these calls in particular, this map shows the calls from 2019. And then there's data from 2018 to back it up. Not all of the data has come together yet. And 2020, you know, has been really wonky so far. What they are finding with human trafficking, as we see our kids at home more, working on computers a lot more, one thing that is an uptick is the grooming process of these children and teenagers through online sources. That there is an uptick on that. And in your resource paper that I gave you, I do have a link to a video put together by Truckers Against Trafficking on how to help your children understand safety as it relates to human trafficking in this grooming process. So I hope you'll take a look at that video. We'll bring it up a little bit further. Traffickers rely on the transportation industry in every phase of human trafficking for recruitment, moving and controlling victims, for delivering victims to buyers. You cannot escape the link between human trafficking and transportation. I'll tell you real quickly a story about Liz. Liz is a human trafficking survivor who, when you hear her story, and I have a link to her story also through Mass Transit Magazine in the handout that I provided for you. So Liz was trafficked, in her own words, she was trafficked the first time when she was 6 years old. Now, while you're trying to wrap your brain around the fact that a 6-year-old is trafficked for sex, know that it was her mother who trafficked her. And as you hear Liz's story, you find out that her mother was a nurse, an educated person. This wasn't, you want to pigeonhole people as you're thinking about human trafficking. But Liz's story does not fit any kind of pigeonhole that anyone could ever think about human trafficking. So Liz was passed from person to person, trafficker to trafficker. By the time she was about 12 to 13 years old, she had memorized all of the rail and bus routes up and down the eastern seaboard, because that's where she was trafficked predominantly. And they could put Liz on a bus or tell her to go to this particular train station, and she would go there for her what they call dates in the sex side of human trafficking. They could do that because this was a person who had been so traumatized since the age of 6, had been raped repeatedly since the age of 6, that she doesn't have the same kind of safety mechanisms built in that we do. She has learned not to trust people. I always hear bus operators say, why won't these people just come up and say, hey, I'm trafficked, I need help? You will rarely see that. They do not see themselves that way because they've been conditioned not to, and they are afraid, and they've been hurt deeply. So sometime in Liz's 20s, she was beaten horribly. And she, in what they call a moment of clarity, realized that if she did not get out of her situation, she would die. And that overrode anything for her. She immediately got out of the house. She was not clothed properly. It was a very cold night. She ended up at a bus stop at the wee hours in the morning. And a bus operator who was just starting their early morning shift at 5 a.m. Saw her sitting on the bench and said to her, how can I help you? Do you need help? And Liz said it was the first time since she was 6 years old that anyone saw her as a person, that anyone took any notice of her or her need. She came on the bus and she told the bus driver, I don't have a fare to give you. I have no money. I can give you sex, but I have no fare that I can provide. He said, that is not why I asked you if you needed help. He gave her his jacket. He also gave her a lunch that his wife had made for him that day. She said it was the best sandwich and the worst sandwich she had ever eaten. Liz then found that this person, this bus driver, truly did care about her health and well-being, and he got her safely to a place that she could begin her hope and her healing. But it was because one person took the time to see something and then say something, to see something and then do something. And that's really why David and I are here, is to give you ways that you can actually do something. There are, in 2018, the National Human Trafficking Hotline shows that there were over 23,000 survivors identified by calls, over almost 11,000 human trafficking cases, and 5,800 potential traffickers identified. You might see or know someone is involved in labor trafficking if you hear them talking about, and there's several things here, owing money to an employer or a recruiter, or not being able or not being paid for the work that they've been doing. Maybe the person is living and working in isolated conditions, cut off from interaction of others. Maybe they're working in dangerous conditions. They're living in overcrowded, inhumane conditions. They're being threatened by their boss with deportation or harm. Or you hear them say that they don't have control over a passport or other identifying documents. There are also some ways to know if someone might be in a sex trafficking situation. If you hear them talking about that they want to stop participating in selling or trading sex, you may hear them overhear them saying something. They may disclose that they were reluctant to engage in selling sex, but somebody made them. They live where they work, or they might be transported by guards between home and a workplace. Sometimes there are children who live with or are supported by or dependent on a family member with a substance abuse problem. Liz's situation, she believes it was drugs, that she was sold for her mother's drug habit. The person says they have a pimp or a manager. They work in an industry where it may be common to be pressured into performing sex for money, like a strip club, massage business of some kind. Or they have an older, and this is really important, an older or simply controlling parent, guardian, romantic partner, or sponsor who will not allow that person to speak, or you can't meet with that person. They seem to monitor all of their movements. So with that, we have a couple of poll questions, and then we're going to move into David actually speaking to you.
We do, and normally, as Kristen mentioned, we would break here for poll questions. I am going to have us move along just to make sure we have enough time for all the great information that they have to provide for us. If you do have any questions, you can put those in on the left-hand side on the chat pod. We will be stopping 2 more times at least for questions, so I'll read those off then. The one thing I do want to encourage you to do is one of our challenges that we have here at the Rural Safety Center, and that is from all of the great information that you just heard from Kristen on this section of the webinar. If you wouldn't mind taking a second and writing down one action item that you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction based on all that information that you heard. At the end of the webinar, if we have time, I will ask you to type those in as well. But again, just from this section, if there was anything that really struck a chord with you that you're willing to consider implementing, just jot that down at this time. And I am going to go ahead and at this time turn the presentation over to the Chief so that he can make sure he gets his information in for you. And again, we will have another question and answer period after this. So Chief, if you want to go ahead and check your phone line, and then at the bottom of the PowerPoint, you can see those right and left arrows that will allow you to control the PowerPoint as well.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. We can. And real quick before you go, there's another question about the information sheet. You can find those in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. There is both the resource and the PowerPoint as a PDF that you can download. Just click on those, and there's a button right underneath it to download those files. And we're all set now, Chief. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, and welcome, everyone. So I just want to take a few minutes to visit with you about our experiences working through some educational and prevention efforts, some things that we had overlooked for a number of years, and when we started to get engaged in this, found many more opportunities to help move the needle. As Kristen said, you know, this is a problem that has existed for many, many years. If you know your Bible, if you go back into the book of Esther, there was human trafficking occurring way back then. So this is not a crime that's just of the recent era, and it's not a victimless crime. One thing that, as we always have our staff that goes out and does a lot of training to industry, to other government agencies, and also to any public groups, is we make sure that a couple things as our ground rules. Number one, we never, ever, ever refer to a victim as a prostitute, because that is not what they are. They are truly a victim. This is not a victimless crime. And so we try to keep that concept always in front of people. The other thing, and Kristen alluded to this is modern-day slavery. And this is something that continues to exist. Money, of course, is the driving factor, has with all criminal activity. And it's really gotten to the point where we can now all get involved. Even as we walk through these things today, as you see things and go, well, we really can't do that in our work unit, really can't do that with our agency. The information you're getting today is something that you can do as an individual anytime you see anything that may trigger in your mind a suspicion of human trafficking occurring. So please take that with you. All these people on this webinar today, this just adds to the army of people out there watching for this, and that's really encouraging to us. So we've been working with a group called Truckers Against Trafficking. A lot of you are probably familiar with them. Based out of Colorado. It was a small 501c3 that started up years ago with kind of a family ministry. Candace Paris, her sisters, and her mother had a compassion to try to make an impact on what was occurring out there with victims being trafficked for sex. We talk about trafficking, we talk about labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Traditionally, statistically, throughout our state in Iowa, and also it very much parallels what we see in the country. About 3/4 of the trafficking that we see on an annual basis is sex trafficking, and it's probably not a real true stat because I think a lot of labor trafficking is underreported. We're getting better at that as government agencies starting to identify those types of things. But we've been involved with Truckers Against Trafficking for about the last 10 years, and we were actually the first law enforcement agency to ever reach out and start to get involved with them. Our Attorney General had been at some conferences out on the East Coast, and he came back and he said, I didn't think human trafficking was an issue in Iowa. We're only 3.1 million people. We're in the middle of the country. Everything kind of happens here last, right? So this really piqued his awareness, and he asked state agencies to see what they could do to get involved to help combat this. He wanted to make sure that we did everything in our efforts and our ability to make Iowa a detour state for human trafficking. We do not want it to occur here. It does occur here. We're not proud of that fact, but we're very vigilant in our fight against it. So as Chief of Motor Vehicle Enforcement, our nexus with the trucking industry is very closely related. We do a lot of interactions with them through our enforcement efforts and our education efforts. So this was a really good fit for us to get involved with these folks. Kristen kind of covered some of these, but again, it doesn't hurt to think about this again. There's 3 elements that make up human trafficking: force, fraud, and coercion, and force is as bad as you can think it is. As horrible as you can ever think something can be done. I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about a case that we had start in Iowa that was actually, the victim was rescued out in the state of Virginia. And her traffickers had actually branded her. Kristen talked about that. They brand their victims, but they branded her with kitchen utensils they heated up on the stove in the camper. And that was some of the force they used. They actually took razor blades and slit the bottom of her feet so she wouldn't run away. So you can think about the fact of these are truly victims. These traffickers don't look at them as victims, as Kristen portrayed there. They look at them as a commodity. And when they no longer are valuable enough for them to make money on a regular basis, they discard and go on to the next victim. So force is as bad as you can think it is. Fraud, obviously, is something else that's used very effectively. We had a case in Iowa where we had a bunch of college kids. We had one of our officers was at a truck stop late on a Friday afternoon and getting fuel, and the proprietor of the truck stop came out and said, "Hey, can you get these kids off our lot? They're beating on drivers' doors. The drivers are trying to get their required rest, and they're complaining, and it's not good for our business." So we interacted with those folks, and this was a group of college kids that were out of the southern tier states, down on Mississippi, Louisiana, down in there, and they were brought up into the Midwest for the summer to sell magazines. This was a couple summers ago. They said the van dropped them off and then left. So they were just walking through the parking lot beating on doors. And we talked to these kids, and they answered an ad that they picked up off of the internet, Craigslist, and it gave them a signing bonus to come on and sell these magazines with also some incentives, as with all sales. If you can sell more, you earn more. We'll provide your lodging. This will give you a chance to see kind of middle part of the country. Great summer job, right, for an older high school or a college kid. But what happens is the magazine industry is not what it was years ago. It's hard to meet those demands, the quotas that they were playing on those kids. So what happens is they'll then tell them, well, you know what, you're not selling enough, so now we can't pay for your food. Now we can't pay for your lodging. You're going to have to figure this out on your own. They have taken these kids 3 and 4 and 5 states away from any support system, anybody that may know them, so they're not near family. They become dependent upon the person that they're working for, and they say, you know what, by the way, there's a way you can make a little extra money, and boom, the fraud of a labor trafficking now gives a gateway into the sex trafficking side. And so that can happen very frequently. The other thing, coercion is very effective. You know, the average age of persons being trafficked continues to go down, and coercion is very effective with younger kids and younger teenagers. If you think about the fact when you were in your teenage years, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, your life experience was pretty limited at that time, so you didn't have a lot of life experience to make some really quantified decisions. So if somebody tells you they're going to do something, you're going to believe that they're going to do it, especially if it's an adult. It's going to tell you, I'm going to hurt your family, I know where your grandpa is, I'm going to do something to your puppy or whatever. And they do. They coerce these young people into complying with their savage acts so they can make money on behalf of these people. If you've ever dealt with a human trafficking victim, I always tell our staff this, and we do a lot of training on this throughout the Midwest and the country and in our state, is if you ever know anybody that's ever been sexually assaulted, you think about the trauma that they've gone through. And you think about the rehabilitative process and the mental strains that they're working through, and just the whole concept of getting both physically and mentally back healthy. Well, I'm referring to somebody that has been sexually assaulted once. If you think about a human trafficking victim, this is going on 20 to 25 times a day, day after day, week after week, month after month. And so you can kind of see what happens with the mental state of a person and how they can become somewhat dependent as a matter of survival on their trafficker. So again, very, very heinous crime. If you look at this little blurb at the corner there, that red part of the slide there, I was shot 5 times, stabbed 13 times. That's what it looks like, folks. And like I said, that's as bad as it can get. And again, you know, these people are savage, and they're all about money. Money does strange things to people, and this is a crime. If you think about human trafficking compared to drug trafficking is still economically the top moneymaker for a lot of criminal enterprise. But human trafficking is bumping right up against it. Because if you think about it, if a trafficker sells a drug, that drug's gone. Trafficker's got to go get another drug to sell to the next buyer. With a pimp or a trafficker, they can continue to sell their victim time after time after time after time again. Also, law enforcement's got all kinds of neat tools to detect, you know, drugs being hauled in vehicles. We got dogs, we got ion scanners, we got all kinds of toys to go look for that stuff. But it's a lot easier just to move human trafficking victims around and make them look like they fit in. So again, it's a pretty difficult crime sometimes to crack. So questions for the moderators. Am I supposed to monitor those questions and answer them as we go, or are we going to catch those in the end, or how do you want me to handle that?
It's completely up to you. I can read them out to you at the very end at question and answer, or if you would like to address them now, you may. Whatever's easiest.
If we can do it at the end, that'd be great. If that doesn't throw anybody off, I'd prefer that if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'll read them out to you when we stop at the question period.
Thank you. A few stats, and Kristen threw a few of these out, but again, look at that dollar figure. It does strange things to people. That's $9.5 billion in the United States. The average age of entry. Yeah, this slide says 13 to 14. We've seen victims 7, 8, 9 years old. Gender is not there's men, there's males, there's females, there's men, there's women, there's boys, there's girls. This crime knows no ethnicities, no race, no age, no gender. Everybody can become a victim of this. If you look at that age, one thing that we really push hard on when we do training to some of the groups is, especially if it's a group of parents, we talk about the fact of, think about, do you know how your child's communicating on their smartphone or their Android or whatever device that they use to communicate with? Because almost every kid has it. My wife teaches second grade in a public school system in the western Des Moines suburbs. She's got second graders, and a majority of them carry iPhones. So it's just that's the mantra of today. But again, as the stat shows here, almost 300,000 children a year are being risk at being trafficked in the United States. And I already talked about that last figure there, that the number of times that a trafficker will sell their victim. And we've hit this too. And again, this is kind of a globally thing, that this is just the same traffic means are done throughout the world. And, yeah, we've all seen the movie Taken and Taken 2, and we've seen, Liam Neeson makes great movies, but it's not always the way it happens. Are there people kidnapped? Absolutely. Are there people that are, physically taken away? Absolutely. But for the most part, this is a very sneaky crime, and part of the process of this is kind of the perfect storm that we've created, and the society that we've allowed to operate this way. If you look at the way that pornography is viewed today, and you look at the different avenues for pornography to be, infused into our society, social media is a huge, huge challenge for law enforcement. No matter, there used to be, Backpage used to be one of the main sites for traffickers to market and sell their victims. A lot of times a trafficker will watch for a large event to take place wherever there's a number of people that are going to gather. In our state, again, we're a small state, 3.1 million people, but there's some big events in our minds, and one of them is our state fair each year. Our state fair brings in about 105,000 people a day, and it's a 10-day event, so you can do the math on that. But some of the training I have done with Truckers Against Trafficking, we go out and train law enforcement, and we bring a victim survivor with us to train, because law enforcement, for a number of years, and I'll admit it, even in our agency, we were blind to this. We did not really take notice that this was happening right under our noses. And a lot of times what the victim trainers, survivor trainers will tell law enforcement is, we interacted with law enforcement a number of times. We interacted with people in restaurants a number of times. Nobody picked up on the clues that we were trying to push and give them that way. So anyway, this one victim survivor that was training with me, she said, I've been to the Iowa State Fair 3 different times, but I've never been to the fair. She goes, I remember my trafficker would bring 5 of us up, and we'd be there for 5 days, and then we'd get sent back, and another trafficker would send up 5 more. And this young lady was from the state of Alabama. And she said, I do remember one thing. She said, I remember looking out the window of my hotel, and I could see a white wooden roller coaster structure. Well, we have an amusement park that sits about a mile and a half north of the fairgrounds, and it's off of a main road, but yet there's an amusement park sitting right next to this hotel that they were using, and that's what she remembered. So again, anytime you have large events coming in to your state, to your locale, to your city, that's a huge avenue for traffickers to sell their services of their victims. It's also a recruiting grounds for traffickers to look for victims. We've had another situations where we've got a large, we trade with Illinois every other year. We have a Farm Progress show. Brings in hundreds of thousands of people every year. You just think of the events in your state, and wherever there's lots of people coming in, believe me, there's lots of trafficking going on. The other part of the culture that we really try to make parents aware of, do you know who your child and your young adult is conversing with on your cell phones or on their phones at night or on the chat sessions or whatever? Because the trafficker is going to communicate with your 12 and 13 and 14-year-old child, and they're not going to tell them, hey, I'm a 40-year-old trafficker looking for a person that wants to go out and work for me. What they're doing is they're coming on those sessions, and they're representing themselves as a 13 or 14-year-old female or male, and they're just striking up a friendship. And they strike up the friendship, and they start that social relationship through the social media, and eventually that may turn into a physical meeting, and it may turn into them buying them gifts, sending them stuff, those types of things, kind of luring them in. It's a slow type of progression to build some trust, to build some relationship, and then boom, it can be a gateway into human trafficking. So I was very fortunate, my wife and I, to raise our children before the cell phone era, but if I had a young child, I would not let them have that phone in their room at night, because between 10 at night and 5 in the morning, that's prime time for traffickers to be perusing the social medias, trying to talk to your kids, our kids, my grandkids, and so that's a huge deal. So again, we've kind of, as a society, created this perfect storm, and it's up to us to really, rein that back in. If you look at this slide here, 90% of the women in the sex industry, and I don't like the term industry, it's not a business, but again, we're sexually abused as children, and it goes on down the line. 89% said they wanted to escape. This is the point I like about this slide. Is 89% said they wanted to escape but had no other means for survival. And it's kind of the same scenario as a prisoner of war. A prisoner of war is incarcerated for so many years and for so long in such a horrible existing conditions that they realize that to survive, to live another day, this is what you have to do. And this is where victims a lot of times will interact with law enforcement or other people. And we've even arrested victims of human trafficking, and a lot of law enforcement for a period of time would charge them with prostitution, kick them back, they bond out, kick them back on the street, and we really haven't solved anything because we're not getting to the source of this whole problem. The victims do not make any of the money. Human trafficking is set up in kind of a family structure, and if you talk to anybody that's been involved in it or knows a little bit about it, they'll talk, a lot of times you might hear them refer to their trafficker as my daddy instead of their pimp or their trafficker. They also have in the structure what's called a bottom girl. And the bottom girl is the one that would take the money from the buyer and get it to the trafficker and then gets a cut out of that. The actual victim, they get no money. We've worked with other survivor trainers through Truckers Against Trafficking, and one of them said she was in a hotel room for several days. Very little food and water, took all of her clothes, just kept bringing men in on a steady basis. If she wouldn't comply, trafficker beat her. She eventually realized, you know what, to survive, I've got to do this. So again, it's not a victimless crime. Truckers Against Trafficking has some great tools and some great training opportunities. The thing with this group is, don't let the word truckers, if you're not involved in trucking at all, steer you away from it, because that's just the umbrella that they operate under. They're really focused on, they're really focused on the commercial vehicle industry. It's a huge resource out there. If you think back to 9/11, what happened when the towers were hit, one of the first industries that we reached out to as law enforcement and as government entities is the trucking industry. We said, hey, look, there's 3.5 to 5 million drivers out on the roads every day. There's not that many law enforcement officers. Drivers blend in better. Officers, it's pretty easy to tell when we pull up in our squads in full uniform, put the campaign hats on, all that type of thing. It's not too hard to figure out who we are. but with drivers, they kind of blend in. And at 9/11, we asked the drivers after 9/11, if you see anybody around bridges and power plants, water plants, because as a country, we'd never been through anything like that on our borders, and we didn't know what to expect next. So trucking industry was we marshaled their resources. This is modeled very closely after that. We do a lot of training for trucking industry and for local trucking companies because they're out there every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're in spots law enforcement can't get in. Is there drivers that have purchased commercial sex from a buyer? Absolutely. Is there teachers? Absolutely. Is there doctors? Absolutely. Is there people in the ministry? Absolutely. Is there law enforcement? Absolutely. So to put an umbrella and say, well, this all happens at truck stops, that's why this organization exists. These truck drivers are all the bad people. That's not the case. These people are a great resource, and so that's kind of why we really have a good relationship working with them and Truckers Against Trafficking. One of the terms you may have heard before is lot lizards, and again, very derogatory term. That person that's referred to as a lot lizard, it was somebody's child. It could be somebody's brother or sister. It could be somebody's spouse. That's a person. We're all have people that love us and care for us, and we all came from family structure of some sort. But again, we keep trying to reiterate to folks, these are victims. This window decal is what we asked to put up. In their windows because if it helps them remind them of, like Kristen gave the number earlier, if they do see trafficking or suspect trafficking, then they can call that in, report it, or if a victim sees that number, texting number, they can text there, and that goes into Polaris too, and hopefully can get them some resources. TAP's mission is, again, to really marshal the resources of the trucking industry, to be really observant out there, because if you look at as the slide shows, if you look at the number of places that they intersect with victims, parking lots, rest areas, terminals, hotels, motels, you name it, those are all, again, areas where you're in too, with your normal courses of business, on your family trips, those types of things. So we can all be eyes and ears on the road, because as the poster shows there, everyday heroes are needed. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes on our Iowa case that was actually at the result of a truck driver making a call. And that lady that was rescued truly believes that was her hero. That was her shining star that day. And minus that happening, she probably wouldn't be alive today. The Truckers Against Trafficking's mission is to educate, equip, and empower the members of this industry to look at human trafficking as combating as part of their regular jobs. We also work extensively with the truck stops and the truck plazas, and they do not want that to occur on their facilities either, and they've been phenomenal partners as we work to marshal all our resources and collaboratively work together to take this on. So again, we saturate the industry with different materials, and as I said earlier, marshal the resources. One of the other things we do is we partner together with Truckers Against Trafficking, with prosecutors, with victim service providers, with law enforcement. We have what's called coalition meetings, where we'll bring a group of people together in a certain area, and we'll spend 4 hours, and we'll have victims come up and speak, and we'll have service providers speak, we'll have law enforcement speak, and basically it's to get everybody's head around this problem and what we can do together to take this on. We've had a number of coalitions in our state. They've been very effective. We actually had, in the planning stages of a really neat project we were going to do with our casinos all along the Mississippi River on the eastern border of our state before COVID, that all changed when that hit, so we'll have to get that going again in the near future. So the wallet cards are one of the things that we give out at every training session. The wallet cards are, it's kind of the holy grail of Truckers Against Trafficking. It's got all the information you need on there. It's got the numbers on there. It tells you what to look for. You open up the card, it tells you we want actionable information. And as Kristen said, when you call Polaris, you're going to get, the phone's going to be answered. It's not going to be a calling tree and leave a message and punch this number. It's answered in a multitude of languages. It's answered, again, 24/7, 365. And so what happens is a call goes in. Say, for instance, you saw a suspected human trafficking incident. You make that call to Polaris. You give them some of this actionable information. That information's entered. It's spit back out within minutes to the law enforcement area that this call came in from, or suspected area of problem. Within just very, very short time, what happens is each state's got designated recipients of that. In our state, I'm one of them. So we get that information, and I get it at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 8 at night, 10 at night, you name it. It's coming in nonstop. And then we get with the local law enforcement right away and see if they can interact, or at least get out there if we're not close, the state agencies aren't close, to get out there and follow up on it. The other thing with this is, when I say actionable information, it's critical that you understand that this is a very mobile crime. So these folks don't stay in one area very long. They don't want the victims to get to know anybody. They don't want the victims to get comfortable with the area. They're going to be moving around a lot. So again, as with most criminal activity, we find this with drug trafficking too. They don't stray off the main roads a whole lot because, again, that's not, they kind of need to know where they're going. So the other thing besides this wallet card is, if you would put on your iPhones, make a note to put on your iPhones or your Androids, Truckers Against Trafficking free app is a phenomenal, easy to operate app. And it's something that you can just click on. There's a button on there that says click to report activity. Click another button to look at what other red flags of human trafficking. You went through some training years ago or months ago or just last week and you can't remember quite what all those indicators were. You can click on that. It'll bring it right up. It also has an option to, we can either call in Mexico or Canada too if you're out of country and see those types of activities. So again, very, very, very good resource. Please use it. It's a free app and it's very user-friendly. So as we started to work with Truckers Against Trafficking 10 plus years ago, Kenneth Paris, the CEO, said, you know, we should start documenting some things, because there could come a time when other states want to get involved, and other DOTs and other law enforcement agencies. So we started to document what we did, and as you can see, the models have grown. We now are in about 47 states to some degree. Texas has a really robust program. It's just the interdiction with the children's program. It's very much modeled like TAP, but it's just they're doing their own program with their own database. So not to say that Texas is not participating in these stretch of the imagination. But there's a few Northeast states that we're still working with to get them on board. And again, we also, I serve on some committees with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, and they have taken this on too as one of their initiatives. And we just started up a brand new program called the Enforcement of Human Trafficking. So this is a great opportunity for all the participants in this, and every state's represented in this association, to really get combined efforts on how we can do some efforts to kind of reach out and not only educate, but also do some enforcement projects. So this is how our model goes. We train law enforcement folks with the TAP materials, because, again, these materials are very useful. We have gone in, we have 11 weigh stations throughout the state. Most are on the interstate system. We have the wallet cards and the window clings in our weigh stations. We also have on the bottom of our inspection forms the same information that's on the wallet cards, so if the driver would not have that handy. We take a few minutes during each inspection, at the end of the inspection, just to talk to them a few minutes about human trafficking and the role they can play. Not had hardly any drivers say, you know what, I don't want to hear about that, I don't think that's a problem. They all want to hear about it. We also put it in our rest areas. We have about 46 of those throughout the state, and we continue to work with the truck stops and trucking companies. We provide all this material, we give them to hand out, we provide it with no charge to them. What we use is our interdiction money that we've taken off the road for drug trafficking cases. We use that to purchase the materials, so we figure that's good use of criminal money to buy more materials to go after more criminals. So we spread the awareness through our multiple social media channels. We have websites. We have at the state fair each year, with the exception of this year with the number of state fairs obviously not happening. We have what's called the Driver's Freedom Trailer come in, which the Truckers Against Trafficking brings in, and it's a 53-foot trailer that's all been redone, and it's kind of a walking progressionary process of how human trafficking occurs. There's 80-inch monitors on the wall. There's artifacts of human trafficking in there. There's interviews being played with victims. People walk in that trailer. It takes about 5-10 minutes to go through. And I'll tell you what, I've been around this for a long time. They're different when they come out of there. It moves them. I mean, it's a very moving experience because you really start to realize, you know what, this could be my neighbor. This could be my friend. This could be my child someday. And it really moves you to want to make sure that you're doing everything you can. As I said earlier, we use the asset forfeiture funds. We work with state trucking associations, and we continue to collect data on all of our stops for interdiction. We use this as some acronyms that probably some of you may be familiar with. There's the drug interdiction folks. We work with them. That's the DIAP, CBSA I already mentioned. There is another app called BOTL, B-O-T-L, which is Busing on the Outlook. So it's got some of the same components. Obviously, human trafficking is human trafficking, but it's just kind of geared a little bit more towards the bus and transit folks. We also have worked with all the public school transportation in our state. There's 9,300 public school bus drivers, and we trained the Department of Education oversees that process in our state. We did a presentation at one of their conferences, and their executive director came back and said, you know what, this is not, I want to do something about this. So he put a process in place, and when a driver gets hired in Iowa to be a school bus driver, they have to go through the Truckers Against Trafficking, Human Trafficking Awareness training. So all of our drivers, bus drivers in Iowa are trained because if you think about it, a child getting on a bus each day, this could be the bus driver is going to see them every day. The bus driver might see some behavioral changes that other people might not observe. They only see this child, time to time. Kristen mentioned, that there's parents that have trafficked their kids. We had a case in a state in the Midwest where a 14-year-old girl would go to school during the day. She'd come home after school. Her father was very drug dependent, methamphetamine, support his habit. He trafficked her in his garage after school several days a week. That's her life. She comes back to school the next day, knowing when she goes home that afternoon, she's going to have to be a sex slave to these men that her father is getting money for so he can support his drug habit. So, again, it was really exciting for us to get those bus drivers trained. And then again, incorporate your training, and we do about 200 to 300 motor carrier safety education talks each year, in-person training sessions, and we do with the drivers, we go ahead and we ask the carriers if we can present on human trafficking a few minutes at the end of each training session. We've never told no. Our Department of Transportation in Iowa, just shy of about 3,200 employees. There is a mandate in place. We train all DOT employees. It was a face-to-face session for all DOT employees initially. We have an onboarding process for the new people hired. It's a video, but again, because not knowing if they're in construction or if they're in maintenance or if they're rest area folks, they're all going to potentially come in contact with human trafficking victims from time to time. So I'm going to wrap it up with this. So this is Kevin Kimmel, and this is Kyla. Here, she's Candace, the CEO. This is Kyla's her sister, one of the initial folks that helped get this started, does a lot of training. But again, Kevin was given an award, the Harriet Tubman Humanitarian Award, and the Kevin's story goes like this. So he drove for Conway Freight. This is two people in Iowa that abducted a 20-year-old woman and drove her from Iowa, from Des Moines, Iowa, to across several states. What happened was this lady was kind of down on her luck at the time, and she, I don't know, really never did get the real backstory and how she got introduced to these people. These people had kind of an old ratty motorhome, and she interacted with them somehow, and they had struck up a conversation, and she said she was trying to get out to the East Coast to visit some family and needed to get, some things squared away. And these folks said, well, hey, we're going out to Virginia to visit some family too. Why don't you we'll give you a ride out. So again, bad choice, right? She gets in with these folks. The second day that they're heading out east, they're heading to Virginia, they start trafficking her for gas money. And Eldar Hazda, he's the gentleman on the picture, and he was the one that was, first of all, required her to have sex with him, perform sex on him, and then he started selling her. And long story short, they're in a truck stop parking lot in Richmond, Virginia area, and Kevin Kimmel, Conway Freight, are just starting to go through training on human trafficking awareness. He's got a regular dedicated freight route, and he stops in there on a pretty regular basis for most days to do paperwork and things. And he sees this ratty mobile home sitting over in the corner and got really dark curtains, which isn't uncommon. You can see motorhomes from time to time sitting in truck stops. But he sees the young lady's face come up to the window, and then it looks like it's abruptly jerked away, and the curtain's pulled again. And he gets to watching a little more, and there's quite a bit of activity around this motorhome. There's men going back and forth, and they're not there very long. And he starts to watch it, and he says, this doesn't look right. So he called 911, and just by fortune, there was 2 state troopers and 2 deputies relatively close to that call, and they came on the scene, talked to Kevin, went to the motorhome, knocked on the door. Eldar answered the door, was very bold about the whole thing. They asked if they could come in. They'd had some suspicion, a report of suspicious activity, wanted to know if they could take a look around. He said, sure, come on in. One of the deputies was a female deputy, and when they went in the motorhome, they looked in the far corner, and there's this very distraught-looking, very unkept, horrible hygiene, gaunt-looking woman in the corner, and this is the victim. This motorhome is just a mess. It's very unkept and everything. So the female deputy makes eye contact with the victim and nods at her, and the victim nods back. And before these 2 folks could even react, the female deputy and the victim go outside, and she tells her everything. And again, Kevin Kimmel doesn't make that call. That young lady's not alive today. When they took her to get medical treatment, they said, she wouldn't have gotten by many more days. She hadn't been fed for days. She hadn't gotten any resource for food, hadn't been given any food, was forced to have sex 10, 15 times a day with men. And when men weren't there, Eldar he was having sex with her. They, like I said, they slit the bottom of her feet with box cutters so she wouldn't run away. They branded her with kitchen utensils. And but again, Kevin makes the call. And when they interviewed Kevin, they said, you're a hero. And he goes, no, I'm not. I'm not a hero. Anybody would do that. That's what we do, as people today. So again, great story. It works. The system works. And I could sit here all day and tell you story after story. But I don't want to take any more time. I want to give time to ask questions. So I think that's the end of my slides.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chief. And because we are at the end, I am going to keep us going. We're going to go 10 additional minutes for anyone else who can stay on. This is being recorded, and we will post it to the Rural Safety Center's website within a few minutes. So that, within a few days. The website is ruralsafetycenter.org, and if you go to our training page, you can locate the archive trainings. We have posted the link several times in the chat pod if you'd like to find it there. It is also available if you download the PDF of today's webinar. So I am going to go ahead and have Kristen finish up. Kristen has continued to answer as many of the questions in the chat pod as she can as they've been coming in. And Chief, if you are able to stay on the line with us for the next 10 minutes, if you wouldn't mind also answering any questions that come in. There were 3 that I caught that she did not answer that I will repost for you if you wouldn't mind typing in answers to those.
Yep, that'd be fine.
So, so Chief, there is a question that came up. You and I discussed it yesterday, and I did a presentation last week for the transit industry, just very similar to this, and the same question came up. I'd like for the Chief to answer it. It's what are your thoughts on legalizing the sex industry in general as it relates to human trafficking?
Yeah, no, that seems like an easy out. First of all, remember this is not a victimless crime, okay? So to do that, we are not doing anything for the victims at all. Secondly, just by legalizing something doesn't mean it's going to go away. You look at historically why we have laws, why we have things in place. There's ramifications for legalizing everything. We legalized, there was a year period of time when nobody could drink. There was prohibition legally. And we legalized alcohol, and you can see some of the residual effects of that. This is modern-day slavery. We don't want to legalize slavery. So, no, I don't think we should legalize it.
Thank you very much, and we'll, that it is a political hot potato, and my stance also is if you have a supply, you have a demand. There's a lot of information out there, not as much about victims and survivors as there are. There's more about that than there is about the demand side. But if you get rid of the demand, you don't have a problem. So maybe that's where we need to put our focus is demand, in addition to all these other things that we're doing. So very quickly, I want to go through transportation's response. The first is that the DOT has put a pledge out there for anyone, any organization to take the Put the Brakes on Human Trafficking pledge. I gave you a link in the handout, and we can add it to the chat as well. But this is where it all begins for anyone connected to DOT, the Department of Transportation. There are, and I'm going to fly through this. There are electronic resources like apps to help you see something, say something. And they truly are working the upper right-hand block that says platform human trafficking. That was a child endangerment situation where women were forced to beg. They were given drugged babies to hold as props, just as if they were dolls, but these were real human babies that were drugged, and they were forced to beg. That was a question that came up earlier. The Chief talked about the Freedom Drivers Project. We had a question earlier, or a comment that a good poster is one that has tear-off information. So I did have an example of that from Texas, and in the chat box I did put a link to that poster. And you will find many of the most progressive posters will be both survivor-informed and will also be in multi-languages. So think about that as you are putting together a campaign. Everything you see here is free. This is from the Put the Brakes on Human Trafficking campaign. These are transit agencies who have made it a point, and there are many, many transit agencies that have campaigns on human trafficking, and all of their materials are free. There's a great Native youth toolkit on human trafficking that I also put a link to that in the handout as well. If you work in and around tribes, please get a hold of this and use it and distribute it. It's unimaginable the crime that is being perpetrated against Native American women and children in particular. And it has to do with the concept that they are considered in the trafficking world exotics, which, again, doesn't make them human. It dehumanizes them to say that. So please, if you work in this area, this toolkit for youth is very good. Again, survivor-informed messaging. This is from Busing on the Lookout. And I've already told you, and I put in the chat box the link to the Truckers Against Trafficking video, Keeping Kids Safe Online. And there's a lot of resources having to do with COVID-19. That was a question that came up. We won't play this trailer, but there are specific training videos, 30 minutes each in length. One is for truckers, one is for the bus industry, both school bus and city bus. There are a lot of materials that if I don't mind doing research to find them. So if there's a specific group that you need help with, messaging to, please email me and I will find you materials if you cannot find them. As you're putting together a program, you want to think about these things in your planning. No matter where you are in your organization, it's best if you can do it system-wide or company-wide or division-wide, top to bottom, left to right, so that everyone is involved. I had a situation where I was asked to provide training for over 200 public transportation bus operators. It was their safety training, and it was mandatory safety training. Unfortunately, the management didn't understand how important this was, so they scheduled it on Sunday night of Super Bowl playoffs in January. And the team where I was doing the training, one of the playoff teams was from that state. So I have this group of very angry bus operators, and through the training, they got very engaged. They had seen this in their city. They called their transfer center the pit of hell, and they wanted to do something. And they say that because of all the trafficking that they see at this particular bus terminal. And they wanted to help. And when we got to the climax and they said, what can we do? How can we get involved? I look around and the management team, they've all gone home to watch the football game. And that is disrespectful to this, to the process, to the people involved, and to the victims. So please make this a buy-in from everyone. Involve local resources and individuals like organizations that are providing services to victims and survivors. Identify your first responders. I noticed that we have some first responders on the call. So identify those in your local area and tell them, we're getting ready to start this campaign in the area. We want your help, and we want you to know you may get extra calls. So how can we support you with those extra calls that you get in? Tribal leaders and elected officials, talk to them. Let them know that that this is an important thing for you, a topic for you. And then how will you report this information, and what kind of feedback loop are you going to have within your organization? The most important thing we want to do is put traffickers on notice. You are not welcome on our buses. You're not welcome on our trains. You're not welcome on our roads. And you certainly are not welcome in my community. So I hope now through this entire presentation, you can join me now and repeat after me and do it with passion and gusto. Not on my bus, not on my train, not on my roads, and not in my community. So let's get to getting, y'all.
Thank you so much,
Do we
Kristen,
have-
and thank you, Chief, as well. There have been a lot of questions and comments coming in through the chat pod. What I will do is make sure that I go ahead and send those remaining questions to you guys. If you're able to answer them via email, I can post them with the recording link so everyone can see those. There's been a lot of additional information that has also been put in with links, and we'll be able to post those too so that anyone needing those can have them. Again, you can find the recording on our website, ruralsafetycenter.org. Under the training drop-down, you'll find our archived webinar lists. It will be the very first one once we do have the link for this and can get it posted. A few additional pieces for you guys as we wrap this up. Upcoming webinars that we're going to be having are going to be with the Forward group on reducing roadway departures for rural. There are several different ones coming up, one in August, September, October, and November. Again, these are listed in that PDF of the PowerPoint that you would have seen before. I also do want to make sure that everyone knows that we are having our third Rural Road Safety Summit. It is going to be on the Rural Road to Zero. It is virtual this year. It will take place September 29th through October 1st. Very economically priced. All of the trainings on the 29th are free, and the other 2 days to join are $40. So we'd love to see everyone there willing to talk about rural road safety. We are having a poster session where we would love to have everyone join us. If you have any information that you'd love to share with everyone on how to make rural roads safe for everyone, we would love to invite you to be a part of our poster session. It will be held on Thursday, October 1st from 12:55 to 1:55 Central Time. Again, that will all be virtual. Abstracts for this poster session are due by Friday, August 14th to the Rural Safety Center. You can learn more at that link, and again, that link is available in the PDF. And lastly, I want to let everyone know that we've been working really hard over the last year to put together a Rural Road Safety Awareness Week, and I'm finally able to announce that it is happening. It will be the same week as our Rural Safety Summit, so it will be September 28th to October 2nd. Please look out for more information on this. We will be spending an entire week talking about rural road safety, and this will be directed at the public, so we'd love to have all of you on this call help us out with that and getting this information out. We will be announcing this through our social media here soon, as well as through emails to our distribution list and our newsletter that will go out this week as well. So please stay in touch for more information on this. We'll be posting infographics for you to use, social media for you to use. We'll be sending all of this out for you so you can just share it with your audiences. And as a final slide, we do have the contact information for Kristen and David, and then also for the Safety Center, and you can reach us at any time to get additional answers to questions that you may have. So thank you all for joining us, and Chief and Kristen, thank you so much for all of the information today. I know it's the first time that a lot of our audience saw it, and I'm very thankful for you guys taking the time to speak with us today. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.